welcome to our weekly lecture series. This is our sponsored lecture by the ever-present Charles Marshall. We'd like to thank him and his children, his children's children. But after that, nobody else. Let's see. So this lecture is about the Tal Botvinnik match from 1960. What's funny is that the Karpov-Kasparov match that I also lectured on, the theory was a contrast of styles. And this is very similar. In fact, this is probably more of a contrast. Say, Botvinnik, just like Karpov, and Tal, just like Kasparov. And actually, I read a lot about this match to prepare for the lecture, and one of the things that I liked a lot was somebody said, Tal is like Bronstein, but without the weaknesses. Man, he got Bronstein good. Okay, I mean, Bronstein played a 12-12 match for World Championship. All right, so hopefully you can see the picture of Tal playing Botvinnik in 1960. And we're going to look at 3 of the games from the match. Game 1, Game 6, and either 8 or 9, I forgot. Hopefully 9, because that's funnier. Now, to play for the World Championship, you have to do things before that. Okay? Now, according to The Simpsons, if you want to become the world boxing champion, you have to shed pound after pound of fat. And to become the world chess champion, you have to win at least 1 game of chess. Okay? So, now, unfortunately, or maybe it's not unfortunate, that's up to you guys. The way to become world champion changes a lot. It's not like something consistent and you know what's going to happen, especially with COVID. So in 1960, they had a interzonal tournament where they had 1 million people and they played a round robin, and the top 6 players from that event joined the previous 2 players from the candidates tournament that came the top 2 in the and then they played an 8-player candidates tournament, which was also 1,000 rounds. And it turns out Tal won both of those tournaments. He won the interzonal and he won the candidates tournament. And in 1958, Bobby Fischer, who was 15 years old, he came 6th in the candidates tournament, in the interzonal. So the top 6 went to the candidates tournament, which was him. So he was 15 during the candidates tournament in 1959. Now, the candidates tournament was very interesting, and we're going to read about that on the next, I'm going to show you that. This is just chessgames.com, so it doesn't really have a lot of information. It's got like this. Okay. Now, Wikipedia has a lot of information. Okay. And in 1958, they had this huge interzonal tournament where everybody plays everybody. And Tal won, Gligorich was 2nd, etc. The only player that I've played there is Gligorich. I drew him in 1988, 30 years after this tournament. Although I've played Bronstein several times, but he didn't come in the top 6. And to confuse the audience, which is you guys, Yuri Averbach, who came in 8th, he's still alive. Do you guys know how old Averbach is? Anybody? I think Charles is answering, but he's muted, so I don't know. Anybody?
80.
Nobody knows? What's that?
80-something?
Keep going. He's the oldest living grandmaster. He's either 98 or 99, whichever's funnier. 98, right, Spence?
I thought it was 99.
He might be 99. He's either 98 or 99. He's the oldest living grandmaster, Averbach. Okay? The other players aren't as alive. However, number 17, James Sherwin, he is alive. And he is 80-something, and he lives in England now. So, okay. Actually, he played in a Blitz tournament a few months ago, which is weird. Okay, so Tal won the interzonal, as you can see. Then they had a candidates tournament, and somebody pointed out the top 4 players, Tal, Karras, Petrosian, and Smyslov, they all sort of tied each other. In fact, Tal had a minus score in that small group of 4. However, there were 4 other players, Gligorich, Fischer, Olofsson, and Benko, and Tal got 14.5 out of 16 against them. So Tal won the candidates tournament, and the winner of that event played in the match that we're going to analyze today, which was a best of 24 games. Okay, so let me go to the, whatever I'm doing. Let me do whatever I'm doing. And then I have to share that. Although my mom told me never to share, so I don't know. Guess I'll share. Okay. So I have to share, oh, he left. Okay, I think I have to share every board, but I'll figure it out. Or maybe I won't. Okay, so you guys can all see the chessboard now? All right, good. Okay, now the first game I'm going to look at is the first game. This is Tal Botvinnik, game number 1. Okay, and it was a French defense. And Tal liked to play e4, but he played other stuff. And Botvinnik, against e4, usually played the French or the Caro-Kann, but occasionally played the Sicilian. Okay, now Tal liked to play very wild, crazy, creative, interesting chess, and Botvinnik wanted to outplay you strategically and move around and around and around and get little advantages. Okay, so generally whoever got the position that they liked would be considered a favorite. Okay, now a lot of people in 1960 believed Tal was an unsound player. And the reason they believed that was Tal was an unsound player. But they didn't have engines back then, so refuting his play was quite difficult. And sometimes his play was not unsound. That's even worse. So Tal not only played really interesting chess and calculated more deeply than his opponents, he put a lot of pressure on his opponents to figure out what to do. So this is the Winnow variation, which Botvinnik played with black often. And this is the main line. Now, you guys all know that in 1963, shortly after this match, there was a game Fischer versus Finegold. But it wasn't me, but I have a good excuse. I wasn't born yet. That was my excuse. And Finegold happened to be my dad, and Fischer played the move A3. Okay, and that variation's not considered very good for white. But okay, Tal played the main move, E5. And this is the main line of the Winnow, which I played for black many years as a teenager. Between the ages of 11 and 18 or 19, that's all I played with black. I would get this position all the time if my opponent played E4. Okay, now here, I always played knight to E7, but Botvinnik played queen C7, and the idea is after queen G4, which attacks the G7 pawn, since the queen's on C7, we can play either F6 or F5. Obviously never play F6. And Botvinnik liked to play F5 because he played the Dutch sometimes. So he played F5. So he's attacking the queen, but he's defending his G7 pawn. That's the reason for queen C7. Okay, now in this position, white has some very important advantages. White has a space advantage in the center. White has the 2 bishops, and black has this terrible bishop behind all these pawns. On the other hand, white has doubled pawns, isolated pawn, and white hasn't moved any of his pieces yet. So very double-edged kind of position that would favor Tal because it's very complicated. And Botvinnik played knight e7, and then Tal took on g7, and black is sacrificing a pawn, but white's moving his queen every move. White's never moving his other pieces. The other reason this was played is, at the time, this was theory. Not theory anymore. Nobody plays this with either side, but mainly with black. Okay, so Botvinnik sacrificed 2 pawns, but obviously after taking on d4, white's position is hanging. Queen takes e5 check, queen takes c3 check. So white's position looks a little silly because white's only made queen moves. Okay, now almost any grandmaster in this position would play the obvious move, knight to e2, because now queen takes isn't check, and queen takes c3 just hangs the queen. And we developed a piece. But you didn't see Tal developing pieces yet, did you? Okay, Tal made a move that if your chess student made it, you would go, oh, don't do that. Terrible. Then your student would say, but Tal did it. Then what are you going to do, right? He played a move none of you would ever think of ever. However, it does stop queen c3 check winning your rook. So he played king to d1, confusing the audience, which is you guys. And the reason he played king d1 instead of knight e2 is twofold. Knight e2 is the main move, so he got Botvinnik out of his preparation. Botvinnik probably knew knight e2. And after king d1, if it happens later, our knight can go to f3, which is a more active square than e2, since that blocks the bishop. So maybe you don't want to play knight e2 blocking your bishop. Okay, so king d1 is very interesting. Now queen takes isn't check, queen takes isn't check, although the king's on d1. Black doesn't really have a lot of pieces to attack the white king. So, okay. So Botvinnik played bishop d7. It's not the engine's first choice. Queen h5 check, knight g6. And this will make most of you laugh, but you guys will laugh on the inside because you're professional chess players. You won't outwardly laugh because that would insult the players. The engine, today's engine, says king d8 is the best move. Okay, getting the opposition. Okay, king d8, king d1. Okay, but he played knight to g6, which pins his own knight, but he probably wanted to castle queenside, not play king d8. So, okay, now he played knight e2. So Botvinnik has to do something about these center pawns. He played d3. Actually, the engine plays d3. So it's not clear here what black should do because white may later want to play knight f4, and that knight on g6 looks like it's in trouble. So d3, and the idea Botvinnik had was to check the king. He's opening the white king. Very suspicious. And Tal goes back to e1 because Tal wants to castle later. They didn't know the rules in 1960. So black just gave away his d-pawn. White's moved his king twice, so white can't castle, although black can. And the e5 pawn is still hanging. Now, what does this all mean? This position doesn't make any sense, so that's advantage Tal. When the position's really boring and somebody's slightly better, that's a Botvinnik position. When the position doesn't make any sense, that's a Tal position. So Botvinnik probably wasn't too happy now because it's a weird position. Now, if nothing happens, white is up 2 pawns, and white has the 2 bishops, and white has a passed h pawn. So black's got to get something going. He gets one of his pawns back. He stops black from castling ever. Finally, some pieces were developed. h4 is a good move. And the engine for the last 5 or 6 moves says Tal's doing great. It really likes white's position. It doesn't like the way black's played at all. It actually started with the move knight g6. It really didn't like that move. I mean, that knight seems sort of silly. It's pinned. We can't castle. Okay, so when things aren't going well, you try to mix it up. So Botvinnik played e5. Remember, this is game 1 of the match. So the match just started, and it's the most exciting game ever. That's pretty good. Rook h3. Obviously, white can't castle because he moved his king twice, so he's activating his rook some other way. And the engine says these moves are all good. King d7, that's actually the engine move. That gets out of this potential pin and this actual pin. Rook b1 threatening b7, knight f4. And it's clear to me, you guys aren't grandmaster, well, a couple of you are. It's clear to me that white's winning. White has a passed h-pawn, white has the 2 bishops, white has an extra pawn, and black has 2 isolated pawns on d5 and f5. So to me, white's just completely winning. Okay, and the engine agrees. Rook e8, rook b4 attacking the bishop. Queen d1. And in fact, in more than one Tal game, when I was a kid and I was reading these books, I learned this maneuver where a queen's on the side of the board and it wants to go to the other side of the board and it goes to d1 because that's the way you get to the other side of the board. And queen d1 is good, well, because it keeps the king safe, it puts pressure here, it allows the h-pawn to advance. So yeah, I mean, black's just in a lot of trouble here. Black's down a pawn, not enough compensation. takes. Knight g6, attacking the rook on f4. Takes. Okay, so in this position, the problem with taking the bishop with the bishop on e3, which looks completely sane, is black can play f4. Bishop takes, f4. And now it's not clear what white should do. The bishop has a couple of retreating squares. The e-file is open to the king. The h-pawn is attacked. So Tal correctly took with the pawn. That's actually better, even though it gives all the players isolated pawns, because white's up a pawn, white has two bishops, and black's bishop on c6 is still terrible. King c7, c4 is explosive. And now Botvinnik fell apart. I don't really know what to suggest for black. Black's position's losing, but he lost really quickly. So I don't know. I guess he was in time trouble. But he took on c4, which is bad, because he's walking into a skewer. Although, I mean, his position's terrible. He can't play rook d8 to defend his d-pawn because the bishop on g5. So I don't really know what to suggest, but this isn't really putting up a good fight. Yeah, and then he resigned. He's down an exchange, he's down a pawn, and there's a passed h-pawn, and there's just no hope. If you play knight e5, I play bishop f4. So that game was wild and crazy, which is what Tal wanted, and he won pretty easily. Botvinnik never had a good position, okay, which actually will explain our next game. Okay, our next game is game 9 from the match. I mean, no wait, I clicked on the wrong game. I actually put them in order, then I forgot I put them in order. All right, and I didn't go back to the beginning either. Also, you guys maybe can't even see this because I don't have it on ChessBase. Do you guys see what I'm doing now, or you don't? Yeah, I didn't think you did. That actually answers another question I had. Good. Okay, so I have to share that also. Let's see. I'm going to do that one. I think that's right. Was that right? Okay, white just played e4. Do you see that?
Yeah.
What? I did things right? That's weird. Okay, now if you remember the other game, also this could be the wrong game, that's going to be funny. In the other game, black played e6. In this game, black plays, if it's still e6, I did it wrong. Yay, c6. Okay, and this is the Caro-Kann. Botvinnik played the Caro-Kann also. If you're wondering, why did Botvinnik play the Caro-Kann this game instead of what he did in the first game? I showed you the first game. And I guess Botvinnik didn't like that, so we better try something else. Whoops, that was a blunder. Okay. I wanted to see something. Okay. That didn't help what I wanted to do. All right. So it was a Caro-Kann. This is the main line until here. Grandmasters today play h4, knight f3, h5, etc. Tal played knight e2, which is a move that Robert Hess likes to play. If you ever go to Twitch, Robert Hess does a lot of commentary. Now, I used to play the Caro-Kann, and I play it sometimes. And my antidote to knight e2, since they want to play knight f4 and take, is to play e6 and bishop d6 and take this knight. And that's what I do. Botvinnik played knight f6, and there's a very tricky variation here which didn't happen. If white plays knight f4, which he did not do, the idea is to play h4, threatening h5. After h4, if black plays the usual h6, knight takes g6 is really bad for black. However, there's this tricky move e5. And I think Robert Hess has had this position. And the idea is, after takes, we don't trade queens, although we could. We play queen a5 check, and we get our pawn back. In fact, we get our pawn back with check. And the engine thinks that's pretty equal. Pawn structure is pretty similar. So Tal didn't do that. He didn't play knight f4. He played h4. And after h6, he played knight f4. And the bishop just went back. And I know when Robert Hess has white in this position, he's always putting one of his knights on h5. He's trying to attack over here. It's hard for black to move his bishop when the g7 pawn is hanging. So if Hess was white here, he would probably put one of his knights on h5. Tal just castled, and after bishop d6, he played a very Tal-like move, not recommended by the engine. Okay, now you guys, you know about Tal. I've been talking about him. What would Tal do with white in this position? And he did do it.
Knight takes e6.
Knight takes e6. That's how Tal goes. That's how he does it. Okay, takes. And so this is what we call long-term compensation. Black's king is always going to be bad. White has a couple of pawns. White has a knight that can get in there. The engine says, come on, you can't sack a piece like that. Okay. In fact, some of Tal's sacrifices the engine doesn't like, but Tal couldn't resist attacking the black king. Botvinnik played queen c7, which is okay. And he played rook e1. The engine wants to play knight h5. Okay, but he played rook e1, which looks really dangerous. Now, things that look dangerous to a normal chess player, a top chess player doesn't really care about that. They just analyze. They calculate, and they're like, Okay, and if I was playing a blitz game, most grandmasters would stop this discovered check since white has 1,000 discovered checks. However, those discovered checks don't win material. They're just scary. So Botvinnik's like, yeah, whatever, I don't care what discovered check. So Botvinnik wants to castle queenside. So bishop g8 check, confusing the audience. And then he traded on h7. And he played knight f5. Now, Garry Kasparov, of course, and many other former Soviet grandmasters, they studied all the games of the world champions, right? And this game obviously is no exception. In this match, Tal won 6 games and Botvinnik won 2. This was the second in a row for Botvinnik. That was all the games that he won. And so this game was analyzed extensively, one of the few games Tal lost. And Kasparov concluded that Botvinnik's move g6 is okay, but he should play bishop h2 check first and then play g6. And Kasparov said, man, that's hard to do. Play bishop h2, then play g6, because the bishop on h2 is sort of trapped. And in fact, g6 isn't necessary, but it really stops white's attack at the cost of a pawn. So Tal took the pawn, and now he has all his pieces hanging. The knight's hanging. If the knight moves away, the bishop's hanging. So he has to trade here. Now his bishop's hanging, and the attack is sort of gone, and white has 3 pawns for a piece. If you're my student, you know that 3 pawns isn't worth a piece. If you're somebody else's student, maybe you like white, I don't know. Okay, the engine, of course, likes black because 3 pawns are good when your pawns are queening and promoting and so forth. Here, white's pawns aren't doing anything. Okay, so the key position in this game is right here. And if you believe people on the internet, although some of those people think that Trump won, so I don't know, but some people on the internet said this is the worst move Tal played in the whole match. Man, the truth hurts. Okay, and when I put it on the engine, after like 2 seconds, it was the first engine move. Then after about 10 seconds, the engine didn't list it anymore. So this is a move I would never consider. I really don't understand this move. Okay, especially from Tal. Tal should be trying to attack, trying to advance his pawns, trying to get counterplay, and he played queen g3, trading queens, confusing the audience. That move just seems like he's giving up. That's a very strange move. I would never consider such a move. Now you can't take the queen right away, or can you? Because white can throw in rook takes rook check. Although maybe you could, king f8. He traded rooks first, traded queens, and now he's just up a piece in the ending. White has 3 pawns, but white has no passed pawns. So the pawns aren't dangerous. Okay, Tal tried to get a passed pawn, and he did. For those of you wondering, why doesn't this win a piece? Because rook f7. And this is pretty the standard win, I would say. Up a piece. Now, one thing Botvinnik did this game that I like a lot is always repeat. Man, he repeated a lot. That was the first repetition, and there's many more coming. The engine likes all of these moves. It says these moves are good. Tall's trying. Trying is the first step to failure. More repeating. Always repeat. Okay. And here, White resigned. And on the internet, several people said, I think this is a draw. Why did White resign? And I put it on the engine, and after 1 second, the engine said black is plus 60. The engine does not agree. And I'll actually show you the key variation. If White plays king b5, I can just check and take the a pawn. And obviously, this is a very easy win. I mean, take all your pawns here. So if you want to win the b pawn, you have to play king c5. And problem is, after knight takes pawn, knight e4, you can't play king takes b7 because I win your a pawn. The truth hurts. And if you stop knight c5, let's say you play a5, then knight d6 defends my pawn. So that's too bad. And everything wins, but... Now also, since this game was played in 1960, that almost guarantees that they had adjournments. So matches that were played in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they would adjourn the game and play later. So if this game was adjourned and they had time to analyze this, it's not going to be a difficult win. So that game was not a typical tall game for you guys. White sacked a piece, he had an attack, and Botvinnik, he said, yeah, whatever, care about that. And Botvinnik beat back the attack and won the end game. Okay? I mean, Botvinnik was world champion several times. So now, before I show you the last game I want to show you, I want to tell you a long, boring story. When I was a kid, and we talked about these matches, like my elders would tell me about Tal and Botvinnik, I heard two conflicting accounts. One account was Botvinnik was much better than Tal. Tal was lucky this match. In the rematch, Botvinnik showed what an unsound player Tal was and beat him easily. Okay? You could believe that if you want. The other side of the story I heard was, oh yeah, Tal was better than Botvinnik, but Tal was always sick. Tal lost the second match because he was going to the hospital and he was sick. All right, I don't know which is true. They played two matches. Tal won this match easily, and Botvinnik won the next match easily. So I don't know. I know that Tal went to the hospital a lot during tournaments. So, yeah. Okay, now the next match is the most famous game of the match. Some people put it in the top 10 of all games ever. But if you analyze with an engine, you're not going to like it as much. So don't do that. Shh. No engines. No engines allowed. Okay, and that's game 6. And I'll have to share that with you. Let's see, new share. Probably this one. Okay, do you see C4 on your screen? See, so did your screen explode because it was C4? No? Good. Okay. So Botvinnik's white. This is game 6 of the match, the most famous game. So I saved it for the end of the lecture. So they transposed to a King's Indian. Botvinnik liked to play the Benoni in the King's Indian. And if White doesn't want to play a King's Indian, White can always play D3 instead of D4. But Botvinnik didn't mind the G3 King's Indian. So they got these kinds of positions all the time. Very aggressive play. So White's very solid. White has a space advantage. Black's bishop on G7 is sort of passive, but it's very double-edged, complicated play. However, it depends how the game goes. And a lot of times, the game goes where White's doing well and he's strategically winning. He gets more space, He kicks the queen on b6. He wins down the c-file. Black is too passive. On the other hand, when certain aggressive players like Kasparov and Tal and Fischer are black, then they mess the position up, confusing the opponent, and then it's really tactical, and that's what they like. So we have to see what's going to happen. Okay, he trades off that nice knight on c5. And very normal play. The engine doesn't like queen e2. It prefers queen d2. All right. It probably doesn't matter much.
One question here.
Yeah.
What's the point of knight g4? Knight h5, sorry.
You're going to see it in about one move.
Okay.
Yeah. The point of knight h5 in about 95% of King's Indians is to play f5. Right? Now, I could tell you the other point, but that would spoil everything. But f5 is the normal King's Indian kind of counterplay. But Tal had two reasons to play knight h5. The second one, nobody knows. Although I did read the book on this match when I was a kid, so I sort of remember this. Okay, so queen e2. Now, one of the ideas behind queen e2 is we're hitting the knight. So if you play f5 and I take it, you can't take it with the g-pawn because your g-pawn's defending your knight. If you take with a piece, sometimes g4 is going to fork your pieces. So Botvinnik's like, no, man, you can't do anything. And Tal's like, fine, I'll play on the queen's side. If you only play f5, I'll play over here. Okay, and he did. King h2, the engine doesn't like. It really likes white in this position. It doesn't like the move king h2. King h2 is a very strange move. To me, king h2 says, I want to move my f-pawn, so I'm defending my g-pawn. Botvinnik does not want to move his f-pawn. f3 makes no sense. After f4, I take it and open this up. So I don't really understand why he played king h2. Maybe because then rook takes rook isn't check, so he can do some kind of tricks later, maybe. Okay, so f5, and now if it was black's turn, he could play f4 or take on here. So he has to take that. Bishop takes. We don't have time to play g4 because the rook is hanging. Okay, so he played rook a1. All right. Now, I didn't answer your question fully before because I'm going to answer it now. We see one reason he played knight h5. He wanted to play f5. Now, the good thing about f5 is even if black does nothing else, if black just chills the rest of the game, there's a possibility he could play e4 later, and then his bishop would be pretty nice. Before, that bishop was really terrible. So, at least we're going to open up the bishop. Okay, but this is Tal playing black. Tal's pieces are very active, but a3 kicks the queen, g4 forks the bishop and knight. I have the e4 square for my pieces later. So it's not clear what black can do. And this is where black made a very famous move, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Right? No? Remember the reason I said I couldn't tell you why he played knight h5? It was a secret.
Knight takes g3.
You're very close. You couldn't be closer. It's almost knight takes g3.
Knight f4.
Knight f4, yeah. That attacks the queen and the bishop, so we should take a free piece. Yeah. Okay, now in this position, the engine is not impressed with that piece sack. The engine's like, that's no good. Okay, and what it wants Botvinnik to do is very sneaky. Okay, and Botvinnik didn't do it. Now, if you play bishop takes a7, queen a5, your bishop is trapped. And you can't defend it. So the engine wants to play this Zwischenzug a3. Okay, if black plays the obvious queen b3, putting a lot of pressure on white's position, now we could take on a7. There is no queen a5. Then we saved our bishop, and we took a pawn, okay, which is also good. So the engine wants to do that. If we don't play queen b3 and we save our a pawn, then the queen isn't menacingly placed, over here on the B pawn. So the engine said, and then we could play bishop to D2, which is what he played in the game. Now, if white plays bishop D2, which he did, now we could take on B2. However, if Botvinnik had thrown in A3 and black decided not to allow bishop takes A7 and plays here, now you can't play queen takes B2. So A3 was the move. He played bishop D2. Tal took on B2. So black's down a piece, but look at his pieces. The queen on B2 is a monster. The rook's on the C file. The two black bishops. It's a big attack. If two engines are playing, it's going to be good for white. White's up a piece. The engine plays perfectly, and white has a good position. If two humans are playing, I don't see how white defends this. There's too many threats. The C3 knight is attacked 8 million times. Okay, and everything's pinned and attacked. Terrible. Okay, Botvinnik played rook B1, always sack the exchange. And he played F3, never play F3. Rook B1's actually a good move. F3 is not a good move, but it worked out great. Now, I have a friend, whether you believe that or not, his name's Wesley Berger. He's been on my stream before. He knew my dad before you were all born. Okay, and that actually may be true. Man, he knew my dad, man, they met a long time ago. They met 60 years ago. Yeah. Okay, anyway, I'll complete my story after I tell you this joke. It's not a joke. Wes and I were in a bank about 6 months ago, and the banker said, "How do you guys know each other?" And Wes said, "I knew him before he was born." Except Wes wasn't joking. So that's how old Wes is. All right. So yeah, when my mom was pregnant with me, Wes knew my parents. So she's like, "Oh, that's Ben." Okay. So he played F3, and that actually won the game. The reason I bring up Wes so much is he's about 2,300 on a good day, and there hasn't been a lot of good days lately. But 45 years ago, there were a lot of good days, but not anymore. Okay, now Wesley told me the reason I'm good at chess, he says, you make good bad moves. So I make bad moves, then I win by force, because my opponents are confused. Said, most people when they make bad moves, they just lose. When you make a bad move, that's why you won the game. This is an excellent example of that. Okay, F3 is a bad move. He should take the rook, and I think this is better for white. Some people said the game would have ended in a draw like this. But actually, I don't think white has to do that. I think white can play for a win. Okay, but anyway, Tal played F3, and that worked out great. Okay, never play F3. And now Botvinnik made the losing move. Well, I'm glad I wasn't white, because I would have made the losing move a long time ago. This position is too complicated. But what he should do is play bishop takes F3. And the reason that he played F3 was he wants to get this bishop E5 check in with tempo. Get that F pawn out of the way. After bishop takes F3, my analysis, and by mine, I mean my engines, says that white's better. But he took the queen, and that just loses. So remember, if you're a student of chess and you're trying to get better, and you can take a queen or take a pawn, now you know which one to do. Man, chess is hard. Okay, so he took the queen, that's no good. Takes the queen. Now, white's still a piece up, but white has a lot of problems. Pass pawn on the 7th rank, and the craziest pins you ever saw. There's no defense to any of that. So he played rook b3. He tried to defend, but trying is the first step to failure. Rook d4, attacking the bishop. You can't let him take the bishop, so you have to move it. And in this position, he played bishop e5 check, and he missed a brilliant win here. And I remember when I was a kid and I was reading a book on this match, I remember this. It's like the only thing I remember from the book was Tal played this move, but he could have won quicker with this move. And I remember that was this position. Okay, now, it's not really Tal's fault. Because it was 1960, I wasn't streaming yet. Now, I have a good excuse. I was born in 1969, and streaming didn't exist. Those are my excuses. But if I was streaming, what move would I recommend for black? It's one of my always. You can't play bishop f8. You can't play king b1. Always. Anybody?
Sack the exchange.
Always sack the exchange. Rook takes c3, the game's over. Here comes rook d1. Rook d1 is annoying. Let's say you take this. Rook d1. Man, harsh. Now we're threatening bishop takes rook on c3, winning all of white's pieces, and queening. And the engine says rook c7, bishop f4 resigns. Usually the engine doesn't resign, but the engine recommends resigns. Now, this leads me to the best story of the day. It's a true story, and I didn't make it up. It has nothing to do with me. As you all know, and by all of you, I'm guessing like 2 of you know, and the other 12 of you don't, there was a lot of noise during this game. The crowd was going wild. And the crowd was so noisy, they were telling the crowd to be quiet, and they wouldn't be quiet. And in this position, when Tal didn't play rook c3, right, he played bishop f4, the crowd was noisy because they saw rook c3, so they stopped the game, and they moved it into a back room, so there wouldn't be any noise, so nobody could see anymore. That actually happened. There's too noisy in the tournament room that they couldn't keep the crowd quiet. But yeah, rook takes c3 would have been a really nice way to finish the game, and then rook d1, and then white can't defend that. Now, Tal's move also wins, so there's no problem. Bishop f4 is also completely winning. So there's not a big deal. Okay, he took, all the pieces are hanging for your benefit. If he plays knight takes c1, I could take the knight, or I could play rook d1. I don't know which is more annoying. Okay. And obviously, black's winning here. Black's up a pawn. Black has 2 bishops. White's bishop on f1 is pinned. So this is just endgame technique. Tal was not impressed with his own technique. Tal said he should have won quicker. He didn't like the way he finished it up. I mean, he won pretty easily. So I didn't think he had any trouble. I mean, he's got 2 bishops and an extra pawn. Got to an easily winning rook ending. And after rook d7 check, Botvinnik resigned. That was a good idea because that pawn is really good. So that was the most famous game of the match. If you analyze every half move with engines for half an hour, you might decide you don't like that. Oliver raised his hand. I don't even know what to do now. Oliver? What?
You shouldn't resign while somebody is thinking. Like, well, why wouldn't you resign like before?
Exactly. It's possible the game was adjourned here. It's possible he played rook d7. He went, never mind. Yeah. I never complain when my opponent resigns. Unless I'm streaming, then I always complain when they resign. That's different. In a real game, though, yeah. That's right, never resign. This was 1960. What do you want? You know? I mean, this match was all about the Mikhails. It was before Benjamins existed. So that was the 1960 match. It was the best of 24 games. It ended in 21 games, with Tal scoring the 12.5 points necessary to win the match. He won 12.5, 8.5. In 1961, things didn't go so well. So, but you know, this match went pretty well. And I remember in 1979, which was 19 years after Tal was world champion, he played in Montreal Super GM tournament. Karpov was the world champion, and he tied for first with Karpov. So Tall was good for a long time. He was good like until he died, and he was good before he was world champion. Tall was top 10 in the world for at least 30 years, at least. Tall was great. And his calculation ability was unbelievable. And I mean, not only did he win this world championship, but the qualifying tournaments are murder, right? You got all the best players in the world, and you have to qualify ahead of them. And not only did he qualify, he won all of those events. He won the interzonal in 58, he won the candidates in 59, and he won the world championship. Even getting to play for the world championship is tough, because all those guys are the best in the world, and you have to finish ahead of them. So that was a great match, a great contrast of styles. And when the games were really tricky and Tall had a big attack, he did well. In the game that Botvinnik won that we showed, he didn't win many games. For some reason, Tall played queen g3 and traded queens. They got to an ending where Botvinnik was winning, and so that was Botvinnik's bread and butter. Hopefully vegan bread and butter. Well, that was the 1960 World Chess Championship. Go Mikhail. Now, Mikhail won that match, but in the revenge match, then Mikhail won. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. Please like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube page, my YouTube page, and watch Karen and me on Twitch. And let's not forget our main sponsor, our patron, Charles Marshall, bringing you these great lectures. I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.